This is Joe Todd, interview with Mrs. Lillian Harmon, Harmon. Mrs. Harmon, when were you born?
September 20th, 1887.
Where were you born?
In Blandonsville Township, Illinois. It wasn't in town, it was in the country, but they called it Blandonsville Township.
What was the nearest town?
Hmm?
What was the nearest town?
Blandonsville, I suppose.
What part of Illinois is that?
McDonough County.
Mm-hmm.
McDonough, some calls it one or some other. McDonald, I think.
You have any childhood memories of Illinois?
Any which?
Any childhood memories of Illinois?
This one before the river one time to get to visiting, come up a big rain while we was gone. We had to ford that river, and I was scared to death in the big wagon. That's all. Didn't amount to nothing. And then at my uncle's place, when we get to the gate, there was a row of, I forget what the name of the trees were on each side up to the house. And the tall, slender trees, the branches drove up, instead of out. That's about all I remember.
How old were you when you came to Oklahoma?
13 and a half years old. I first went to Missouri when I was 5 years old.
What part of Missouri did you go to?
Sheridan County. It's the north central part, close to Salisbury. Prairie Hill was the little post office.
Did you go to school there?
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of the school?
It's out in the country. It's Washington School.
And remember your teacher's name?
No, I don't think I do. Not offhand.
How old were you when you went to Missouri?
Hmm?
How old were you when you went to Missouri?
5 years old.
What kind of games did you play as a child in school?
How's that?
What kind of games did you play as a child in school?
Let's see. Was it Black Man? No. I can't think what they called it.
Now, there is a game called Black Man.
Is it? Well, one would hide. And how was that? We'd play Andy over a lot. With the ball over the house, throw it over the house, and catch it.
Did you go by wagon train to Missouri?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that trip?
No, we didn't go by wagon train. Papa rented a car and for the stock and furniture and stuff that way, and my mother and us children went on the train. I don't remember anything about the train except one place we stayed with a friend, and I had a big doll about as big as I was. And the next morning I was awake when my mother dressed, and she got up and bathed and washed her face and hands and fixed her hair and went out for breakfast. So quick as she left the room, I got up and washed my doll, washed all the face and that coloring off from it. I was hard sick about it.
What kind of house did you live in Missouri? Was it a frame house, a log house?
Yeah, no, it was a frame house.
How big was it?
I don't think I remember. No, I don't remember anything about that.
What was your father's name?
Otis Dexter Murray.
Otis Dexter.
Mm-hmm.
What was the last name?
Mary, Merry.
Where was he from?
Well, he was born in right around, I think he said it was Good Hope. There was a bunch of towns, small towns, just a clump of them, different, several around there. And I think he was born at Good Hope.
Is this in Illinois?
Mm-hmm.
Is this in Illinois?
Yes, Good Hope, Illinois.
And who was your mother?
Adelaide Goochey.
What was the last name?
Goochey, Goochey.
And where was she from?
But she used to tell us that she was born in Canada East. Now, if you know where that's at.
What did your father do?
He was a farmer.
What kind of crops did you raise in Missouri?
Corn, Kaffir corn. And I don't remember of anything else.
How
Lots
come?
of pumpkins.
How come your parents came to Oklahoma?
Well, they heard about this country settling up, and they wanted to come out, get them a claim.
And what year did you come out?
1901.
How'd you come?
In a couple of covered wagons.
Can you tell me about the trip?
We had 6 horses on one wagon, led a jack behind. The jack wouldn't go across the bridge or the pavement in the towns, or just squat out and want to scoot across. My brother just ordered me to have to get out with a black snake whip and walk across the bridge or on the pavement in the town. And it brought a lot of excitement because Jack, every time he'd hit him, he'd give out a bray. And the streets would line up on each side.
Where was this?
All along the road when we came from Missouri to Oklahoma.
What about fording the rivers?
Well, that was when I was just, I expect about 4 years old.
No, I'm sorry, on the trip coming to Oklahoma.
No, we didn't, I don't remember. We went come across on a ferry when we come to Oklahoma. I believe that's right. Didn't we have to cross the Mississippi or the Missouri River?
Probably the Arkansas, and I'm not sure which rivers. Where'd you sleep on the trip?
We slept in that covered wagon. We had springs and mattresses. No, not mattresses. They didn't use mattresses. They had shuck beds. Take this smooth, soft shucks from the middle off the ear,
The corn shucks?
Mm-hmm. We had a neighbor boy in Oklahoma that was German, and he came over one day and wanted to borrow some corn feathers. And my mother asked him over 4 or 5 times, and she couldn't understand, and she said, well, I don't think I have. I don't know what you want, but I don't believe I have any. He said, oh, yes, you have lots of them. He said, the corn feathers. And she said, well, show me some of them. So he went to the bed and raised the cover up and showed her the bed tick like a lot of people have a straw bed. And we had shucks in ours. And she stirred that bed up every morning and made it just smooth as a feather bed. So she knew what corn feathers was.
How'd your mother cook on the trip?
She had a little stove in front of the front seat of one car, just like a 4-burner cook stove being chopped off in the middle. The oven was small, just half as big as another oven, and there's 2 burners, to cook on, and you could bake in that oven. My sister was 9 months old, and she'd sit in the seat and have fire in that stove, you know, the smoke go out the chimney and keep good and warm. And once in a while she got a chance, she'd stop at a house or camp close to a house. She'd go in and bathe the baby in the warmth. And when she came back to the car or the wagon one time, she said, "I'll declare to goodness, I believe that woman was she put something in her mouth, and I believe it was snuff." And she kept on about it till my daddy said, if you're so anxious to know what it was, why didn't you ask her? And she says, "I believe I'll go back and ask her." So she went back across the road, and they talked a little bit, and she said, "What was that would you mind telling me what that was you was putting in your mouth?" She could see it in there then, you know, from her talking, she had it in her cheek of her mouth. And she said, "Well, that is snuff." And she said, "Well, it looked like snuff, but putting snuff in your mouth?" And this woman just died laughing and said, "Where else would you put it?" She said, "Well, I never seen it put in their mouth before. In Canada, they always sniffed it up their nose." And she said, "Well, you'll see plenty of it put in their mouth when you get to Oklahoma."
What did your meals consist of on the trip?
Oh, we had a little bit of everything. And we had a 10-gallon jar, 2 or 3 of them sitting in front of the one wagon and under the seat, and see there'd be sideboards on, and the overjet over that for the top of the cover, you know, the covered wagon. And we had one of those wagons filled with fruit. My daddy made them 4 boxes that just fit the wagon bed bottom. Had them half-gallon jars. And then in front of them, right under the seat in the front of it, was 2 big 10-gallon jars, and one had lard in it. And we wasn't Seventh-day Adventist then. And
you talk about I'm sorry.
Can't remember what the other one had in it. It seems to me it was sugar, but I'm not sure.
You talked about an overjet.
Mm-hmm.
What is an overjet?
Well, it's a frame that goes over the sideboards, fits on there, and it extends out a little ways. I don't hardly know how to explain it to you. But it makes the wagon bed the width of a springs and mattress, of the double springs and mattress, you know.
Okay.
We got to Lawton the first day of December, one winter, and we camped on the creek bed. Lawton was just getting to be a board house town. It was mostly tents before that. And the first day my daddy took the horses up to he was up to the town, just standing around talking, seeing what he could learn. And he said when he come back, he said he'd see someone come along and smelling, you know, and looking all around, and I sure do smell a norther. It's going to be a bad one. And he said finally he got up courage to ask somebody, what do the fellows mean when they say they smell a norther? He said, "Where are you from?" He told him, he said, "You'll find out tonight." And he said, "That's what it is. It'll be a storm, will it?" He said, "You bet." And he said, "Them horses yours won't stay hitched to the wagon. And if they're not used to it, they'll be so cold they'll break loose." And he said, "No, they'll be all right. I've got good covered blankets for them, and they'll be all right." But along in the night when the norther hit, he woke my brother up, who was just older than me, and he said, "I guess we better take these horses to find a livery stable somewhere." Well, they couldn't find any. And they finally found a 100-foot length tent empty, and the man said they could use that night. So they put their horses in there, and that kind of broke the wind off from them. So then, of course, the storm lasted several days, and the next day, my daddy made a deal with that man to buy the tent. And when he bought the tent, then he put us in the one end. Oh, there's a big space, you see, because a 100-foot tent was probably 20 foot wide. And they put us in, the family in there, and just took the overjet, set it down in the middle. And then when we went to go to bed, we just crawled in kind of like a prairie dog. And we took the sideboards off the wagon and made a table, put baling wire down and to the rafters, and hung a table there. And us kids would have a lot of fun when we'd have children company, you know. They'd get to eating, and they'd move that table a little bit, and they'd be eating out of someone else's plate. And then my daddy built a dugout, half dugout, you might say, and it's kind of in the side of the hill. And we had, then they built a little log room at the top of that. So the dugout was pretty good size.
How big was that dugout?
Oh, I don't know, but I'm just a guessing. I would guess it to be 20 foot wide and 18 foot long, or 16 or 18 foot.
Pretty good size.
I don't know. It's pretty good size.
Yeah. What did you do to the inside of the walls? Did you put boards on them, or?
No, there's just a tent. We just put a footboard down at the bottom around to nail the tent to, you know.
Inside the dugout?
No, that was in the tent before we put it over the dugout. No, in the dugout, I don't remember whether they had walls or not.
So was it just plain dirt walls then on the inside of the dugout?
Up about so far they were, and then there was a tent over that. I guess there must have been walls. I don't know for sure.
How long did it take on the wagon trip from Missouri to Lawton?
Took us just a month, but we stopped in we were close to Arkansas City. What was the name of that little town? And stayed just about a week.
Was it Wellington? Wellington?
No. Winfield?
Could be.
In Arkansas City. We stayed one night in Arkansas City with some spiritualists. They showed us pictures of their family, showed a kind of a faint picture of the dead children, and they told us they could have just as good a visit with them dead as they could the living. Mama, when we stayed the one night there, and Papa asked Mama what she thought about it, and she said, well, that's the works of the devil, that's not God. She said, I've heard my mother talk about spiritualists, and said, that's works of the devil.
Mm-hmm. What's your fondest memory of the wagon trip?
Of the wagon trip?
Yeah.
When we got there.
When you got to Lawton.
We was tickled when we got there and thought we was going to have a home there. My daddy didn't draw a place. He traded some land in South Missouri that he took in on a trade, sight unseen, and he traded that for the 160 acres. And the fellow he got it from had never seen it either.
Can you tell me what that lottery was like? Do you remember anything about it, how it worked? You know,
That
when your
lottery?
father... Yeah, that was a lottery, wasn't it?
They went in, that wasn't what they called the run. The run, you see, is when they went and run in and had this claim, stake off a place. But this was just where they went and drawed a claim. They put in an application for to draw one. And it's about as much as I know about it. Just go draw one.
You remember when that drawing
They
was...
didn't know just where it'd be, you know, when they drawed it. They didn't have to take it if they didn't want to. But if they took it, they'd have to settle on it and build something, you know, and make it their home.
And so your father traded land in Missouri for a
In
claim.
the southern part of Missouri for that, right in the southeastern part of Missouri. He never seen it, and the man that he got it from never had seen it.
So where was your 160 acres then?
It was 2 miles south and a half a mile east of Indiahoma. And Indiahoma is 20 miles south of Lawton, I think. I think it is south of Lawton. There's cache between Indiahoma and Lawton.
Now the 100-foot tent and the half dugout.
That was on this 160
It was,
acres.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now you said that Lawton was just kind of a board town when you first arrived?
Yeah, it was just beginning to build up. There wasn't too many buildings there.
How big was it?
Well, if I remember right, the town just covered a mile each way.
How far was Lawton from Fort Sill at that time?
Well, they run together now just about, but I guess 6 or 8 miles, maybe a little further. I don't know, I don't remember just how far.
You ever visit old Fort Sill?
Yeah, I helped cook for the men when they was building the new boulevard from the old to the new fort.
Oh, you did?
Mm-hmm.
How long did you...
I wasn't allowed to step out of the building because there's soldiers, you know, all around. But the fellow was a friend of the Harmons that hired me to cook, and they had a man cook. Everybody was complaining about him all the time, and I wanted to get enough money to go home on in case I got so homesick I wanted to go. And I told him he didn't want me to. He said it's too hard to work, and I said I can hold up at anything for a week. And I said that'd make me $10. I understand you pay $40 a month, and that'd be all I'd need. So he sent me word one morning that he'd fired his cook, and if I could come have dinner on the table by 12. They just had a half hour to get the teams in for dinner and eat and get back to the job. I could have the job, stay with it as long as I could. And Lord, he went to raising my wages, and I stayed with it right along till I got the railroad built between them. Oh, that wasn't a fort. That was this fort. I stayed there until I got the boulevard built, and then we moved on. We went up by Leedy. That's where I cooked for the railroad man, was up by Leedy. They put the railroad on up that way.
Now, when you were cooking for the men down by, was this at Lawton, when you were cooking when they were building the boulevard?
Yeah, from the old fort to the new fort. Old Fort Sill to new Fort Sill.
What did you cook, and how did you cook it at that time? And how much did you cook?
For them men?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know how much, only that I know that I'd use up 2 sacks of flour a week, 50-pound sacks, 48-pound sack of flour, 2 a week. I'd bake biscuits for breakfast and light rolls for dinner and slice of bread for supper. And when we got moved, up by Leedy. She had just cooked about a week there and had a terrible stove to cook on.
What kind of stove did you have?
Well, it wouldn't, the oven wouldn't heat. It was a biscuit just sitting in there and sobbed, and finally dry through. And so I couldn't hardly cook on it, but he said if I could hold out, he'd get me one of the nicest stoves that he could buy. So he bought a real nice range. And then he asked me if I could think of anything that'd make the work handier. I said, yes, sir, I'm going to make biscuits every morning. I have to put them in this pan and the other pan and wait till it gets empty and then put some in there and put them in the oven. And I said if I had 2 pans that just fit the oven, well, I said it'd be handy. He said, all right, you'll have them. So he went in town and they made me 2 square pans that just fit the oven, Well, I say square, they might not have been completely square. And we'd have sliced bacon, generally salt pork, with the salt soaked out and then dipped in flour and fried crisp, or the bacon. And most always make some gravy with that, just cream gravy, or milk gravy I'd call it. And buttered. Jelly, I bought the fruit by the gallon cans and then made my own preserves and jelly.
How many men were you cooking for?
Well, when I was cooking for the men that built the boulevard, it made 23 extra. No, 8 extra. And for the 23 come in when I went to building a schoolhouse. And so I had 23 extra then.
Well, how many men were building the boulevard? 23. How many men were working on the boulevard that you were cooking for?
8.
8 men?
I don't understand how many men, but because there'd be some that would empty the scraper, and others would be driving and getting up the dirt to build it. One man didn't have no team. He was called a tramp. And he asked me, I had a baby just crawling around. My husband was kind of mad because I took the job, and he wouldn't take care of the baby. And it'd just crawl around, and it worried me terrible to see it crawling around, after me, and I couldn't stop and take it or anything. And it was scared when the men would all come in at once. So this fellow asked me if he could take care of the baby for me. And I said, you sure can. He didn't have no team, and he'd get there a little early. And the baby took right to him. He took care of it all the time. Then he got to where he'd play a trick on the baby. He'd just go in with the men and sit down at the table, and that baby would just crawl as fast as it could go under the table to get to his knees and then stand up there and grunt for him to take it. He never could understand how that baby could tell who he was and where he was sitting with that. So he kept telling us, now that's my girl, and when she gets older, I want that for my girl. I'm going to claim her when she gets a little older. Don't give her to nobody else. Well, we run across him years after that. Oh, a long time after that. She lived nearly 9 years. And we went to Hot Springs, New Mexico. No, Hot Springs.
Arkansas.
Where is Hot Springs?
Arkansas.
Yeah, in Arkansas. And we rented our apartment. I always done my own cooking. And Will went out to look around a little bit while I was fixing supper, and he liked to never came back. And when he come back, he said, you can't. I said, you're a little bit late. He said, yes, I know I am. He said, you can't guess in 1,000 years who our next door neighbor is. And I said, no, I wouldn't have any idea. It was that fellow that had wanted the girl, and he was working at running that rooming house there. Said he'd got to work and jostle just all the soap jars he could hang on his arm at one time. So he asked about the girl, about the first thing, and we had to tell him that she died. And it turned out that his brother married my husband's sister. I didn't know there was any relation or nothing, but his brother married my husband's sister.
When did you meet your husband?
At a dance in, where did we live? See, the new country, and there wasn't nothing to go to unless they'd have a dance. There was no drinking, no trouble of any kind at the dances until there was, for a year or two, and then there got to be some other neighborhoods come in. And it got to be where there's drinking wasn't a very decent place for a person. I can't think where we was living, but I know we went to, when I met him, but we was at a dance, and he didn't dance, but he filled in for a fiddler that didn't come. The fiddler turned out to be my sister's husband later on. He was just an orphan boy at the time. And I was working in Lawton for the banker's wife, helping in the housework. I got a letter from my husband saying that, he said, now you won't believe this, but I went to a dance last night and played for the dance. I didn't know he could even play. And he said, I did. Miles and a half from my mother's. That's where we got married. It was in Indiana.
What year did you get married?
1908. I was 21 the next day after we married.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
How's that?
Do you remember Statehood Day, 1907?
No, I remember when my husband went to it. When I say went to it, he went to town that day. I don't know whether he went to it or not. Oh, what I'm thinking about is when the saloons closed.
Well, that was Statehood Day also, because they closed all the saloons.
Was it? Well, that's where he went.
That was in November 1907.
I can't think. Indiana, I suppose, is where I was living. She never married until 1908.
Were there any big celebrations around Lawton or Indiana that you know of?
Oh, they had a celebration at Lawton every 6th of August.
What was that for?
I don't know. They'd always have a drawing. We were going to stand out with that big wagon. It was so crowded that you had to stand with your head up to see it, to get any air to see anything. And then didn't draw it.
Well, you were married when you were working for the men that were building the boulevard?
No. Oh, yes, I was married at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because I wasn't allowed outside the building. My husband went, he had arthritis. It come on him to where he couldn't walk. He could ride the bicycle. And he'd go every night to the Fort Sill bakery and buy bread, great big loaves, 6 for a quarter, and bring it home in a gunny sack on his bicycle. And then he'd make another trip to the butcher shop and buy roast, you know, and for me to cook. Bring it home on the bicycle in a sack. It hung over the front of the bicycle.
What kind of crops did your father plant on the 160 acres?
I planted some cotton, Kaffir corn, and there was another crop. I don't know what he called that. I can't think. Anyway, he just mowed it and made hay of it.
What is Kaffir corn?
Oh, I don't know how to describe it. It grew up about so high and looked kind of like a canna, big canna growing.
About 2 or 3 feet tall?
Huh?
About 2 or 3 feet tall?
Yeah. I could pick 100 pounds of cotton either in the morning or in the afternoon, but to get 200 the same day, I never did. I'd get maybe 198, but I couldn't get 200. I chopped cotton a little while.
How do you chop cotton?
Just walk along and cut the weeds out and cut the cotton, space it about so, you know, and chop out and have it just so thick.
Yeah, how far would you space the cotton plants?
No, I think about that far apart.
What, 2 feet?
I expect maybe 2.5, 2 feet or 2.5. I never picked very much cotton, and I never chopped very much.
How big is your cotton sack?
How big was the cotton pocket?
Cotton sack that you pick cotton in.
Oh, you had them as long as you wanted them. Some of them would have them nearly, seems to me, there's nearly as long as from here at the wall.
What about 20 feet? 20 feet long?
No, I doubt it. It'd be 20 feet anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't very many women could pick them cotton sacks up and put them on their shoulder and carry them in. I know that. I never tried it.
When you got married, where did you live?
We lived on a farm there somewhere around Indiahoma.
Indiahoma? How big was Indiahoma?
It was just, when it was the biggest that I remember of, it had a bank and 2 stores, 2 grocery stores, and a couple of churches, and then the schoolhouse that had 3 teachers. I took my little girl to school. The first day of school, I was running a little make-believe hotel. This fellow had a drugstore there in town, and every time he'd see me, he'd ask me why I didn't start up a hotel in that building. He'd made rooms out of it. And finally, he said so much about it that I decided I would. My husband's working in the cotton gin. And my husband was sure mad about it. He said, "What do you know about running a hotel?" I said, "I don't know anything." I said, "Never eaten one but 2 or 3 times in my life." But I said, "I've got the name of being a good cook, and I'll just treat everybody like this company come, and if they don't like it, they don't need to come back." But he was running a service car then when the ginning was over. I'd make more than he did.
Oh, what building was this in?
It was in that old drugstore that the fellow had fixed up for. I had one spare bedroom.
Oh, is that where you were living?
And we'd live in there too. Many a night I've slept on the kitchen linoleum with nothing under me but a sheet to cover with.
How come?
Well, I'd use all the bedding and all the beds and everywhere with transit trade. She was just about halfway between Lawton and Wichita Falls. It's a good place, halfway place for him to stop, you know.
How much did you charge for a night's lodging?
I don't remember.
What kind of meals did you fix?
I fixed real meals. It's like a farmer would fix.
What they consist of?
Well, when I thought there'd be farmers there mostly, I'd generally buy a roast at the store, the butcher shop. And then I always had potatoes and a couple of kinds of vegetables. Bread, and made cobbler mostly instead of pie. As my sister said, after she married and went to New Mexico, we visited her and she'd talk about the pan pies. We didn't know what pan pies were. We found out that a pie was made in a pie tin. But a cobbler, and she'd make it in a big sheet pan, bake pan.
What was the name of the hotel?
I don't know whether we named it or not. Wasn't much in the town. There wasn't no place for anybody to eat, except at a restaurant where the fellow was drunk about half or 2/3 of the time. And he could either be too full to fix him anything or didn't know what he was fixing hardly. So I didn't have much competition.
Most of the people around Indiahoma, were they farmers?
Mm-hmm.
People that lived in Indiahoma?
Yeah. Now, them lived in town, but didn't farm much. What they done, I don't know. Only they had the drugstore and they had the hardware store, grocery store, bank. And that wasn't, I don't remember just how many miles, but it wasn't too far. 10, 12 miles, 15 maybe, from Quanah Parker's place.
Did you know him?
Mm-hmm. His daughter, she was well educated at that time, and she worked in the bank there in Indiahoma.
What bank did she work in?
There's just one bank there, and I don't know what it was called. I suppose a state bank, don't you reckon?
Could be.
I think it was. I'm not sure. I've been at Quanah Parker's house when him and his women were eating dinner. They were all sitting and laying around the table on the floor, and eating on the floor. Had a nice house.
Can you describe his house?
No, but only it had a lot of rooms in it. I don't know, 10 or 12. This was a big house. They said his wives always got along good together.
How many wives did he have?
And I heard that he had 7 at one time, but I'm not sure about it.
You ever talked to him?
No, I don't think I ever talked to him. Didn't know him that well. I'd heard him talk. See, his mother was captured when a little girl, and that's how come him to be he was a chief, Comanche chief. Or was it Apaches?
Comanche?
I'm not sure. The Comanche Indians is the one that lived around in there close to us. We had a family of Indians living just up on the hill, be about, half a mile from our place, I guess, from our house. And they had a son to die. And they took when we first found out he's dead, there was a white man that had been captured when he was a boy, living there close to the Indians. And he said that when his son died, before they woke him up and him living right there in another little house, said they had him sitting in the wagon straight up, painting his face. And he heard him burst out in a cry, and it sounded a whole lot like wolves howling. Pitiful to hear them cry.
What were they putting him in the wagon for?
To take him to the cemetery to bury him. As quick as he died, they took him out to the wagon and put him in. Before they painted his face and fixed him up for death, for burial, you know. Have you been getting all that stuff from me that I'd say on that?
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me some more about the Comanches?
They was very good people when we first went there. You never heard of them stealing, never heard of them getting drunk or anything. But later, after the first year or so, they began to drink more.
How come?
Well, they began to learn the ways of the white man, I guess.
Did you get to know any Comanches, become personal friends with them?
Oh, yes, we had a family just lived not far from us and got well acquainted with them. I've been up to their house and watched one lady with her head in the other's lap and her picking the lice off and popping them, you know, sewing them down. My sister taught school pretty close there, and we got lice in the school. The Indians, oh, so many of them had lice.
Can you just tell me just basically what kind of clothes do they wear, the Comanches?
Oh, they dressed, unless he was dressed up in, they wore a uniform or something, on some special occasion, they just dressed like a whole lot like white men.
What do the special occasion clothes look like?
Oh, they'd have a big get-together dance or something, you know. Then they'd hop around, you know, and sing, and make a noise.
Did you go to any of their dances?
Mm-hmm. Several of them.
Can you tell me what they were like?
Well, that was about it. They just started around the room and just everybody one by themselves, you know. And some would say one thing, or you keep saying it, and some would maybe say another, and they'd keep time to the drum as they went to march around.
Was this inside the house?
Mm-hmm.
How often would they have these dances?
I don't know.
What were the Indians' names that you knew that lived next to you?
White Horse. And I hadn't thought about the names. I can't think. That white man, his boy, he was captured when he was a boy. His name was Herman Lehman. There was one funny thing happened after later years. Oh, that was quite a number. Let's see, married in 1908. This must have been 10, 12 years, maybe more than that after that. But there was a little boy got shot to death. And of course his grandparents came and the neighbors all went in and cleaned the house as usual and cook and bring it in. And the Indian, there's an Indian lady with a baby and a white woman with a baby. The white woman was unusually white, a nice-looking white woman, and she had an Indian-looking baby. And the Indian woman had the white baby on her lap. And the old grandpa of the boy, he was there, you know, they hadn't brought the corpse to the house yet. and he walked by a door where they sitting on the doorstep. And he'd walk back by, and he'd look at them. And finally he walked up to them. He said, "Ladies, I can't stand it any longer. Tell me why you hold each other's baby." And they laughed real big, and they said, "We're holding our own baby." And he said, "Well, how come?" He says, "Here, you've got the Indian baby in your lap," to the white woman, and then to the Indian he says, "And you've got the white baby." And well, she said, "I married a white man, and the baby took after him." And she'd married an Indian, and the baby took after the Indian. The women got quite a kick out of that. But that was after they was well educated and all. You couldn't tell them Indian from the men then the way they dressed. But in the beginning, where the explorers wore shawls, just wrapped around them, and a skirt that was just a piece of material so long it would just lap around. They'd kind of tuck it in to hold it up, and a shawl on over it.
So the Comanches were very good people?
Yeah, they had the name of being better people than the Apaches did. Well, they had to keep, the Apaches keep causing trouble, make riots on the white folks, but not after the place got settled. They didn't do that. Were
the Comanches farmers? Were they hunters?
They got to where they did. Mm-hmm.
What, farmers?
They did some farming. Indians never seemed to take to the work very much. The wife done most of the work.
What kind of work would the woman do?
Well, she'd make blankets, weave, and weave baskets. Do the cooking, I suppose. There's one thing about them. What I knew of them was awful clean. Now the wilder Indians, they ate little pups just before they were born. I mean, they'd kill the mother dog to get the pups. And you could tell how, there was a saying, that you could tell how rich a Indian was by how many dogs was following him. Sometimes it'd be 6 or 8 dogs following behind an Indian.
Did you know any Apaches?
Not many of them. They was further out of our neighborhood there.
How did the Comanches live in groups?
Well, not after they got kind of civilized, they didn't, but there in 1901 they did. There'd be a big bunch of them with the teepees around, the tents. I think they called them teepees.
Did you visit them then when you first came there?
Do which?
Did you visit the Comanches when you first went there in 1901?
Yeah, there was Comanches close by then.
Did they accept you pretty good? Did they accept the white people coming in?
They was all right. They didn't mind it at all. No. Another thing, when the Indian died, they do away with everything that belonged to that Indian. If they can't bury it with him, and the government got to where they wouldn't allow them to bury it, only so much, because people would come in and rob the graves. But they'd take a new sewing machine or the new pots and pans down in the ditch and just break them all to pieces, just throw them away. Never tried to sell nothing or give it away or nothing that way. They just destroy it.
Why'd they do this?
As a custom, I don't know why.
Do you know any more of the Indian customs?
I don't know as I do.
How about, did they tell you any stories?
No, they don't talk much as a rule. They're very quiet. The Comanches didn't there. They never talked much.
What did your husband do?
Where'd he go?
No, what kind of work did he do?
Oh, he farmed in the beginning, and then he went to work in the oil field. We had a neighbor that drilled wells, and he told him that if he'd moved where he'd moved, about 20 miles from where we was living, he said, in 2 months' time I'll have you drilling. And drilling paid big wages. So after our little girl died, he moved up there. We did. Where he was living, that is a new oil field. And it wasn't but just a few weeks till he had him a drilling. And he'd come in and say to me, have you counted up how much I've made now? He said, you don't get behind. You'll never catch up if you do. And making it faster than you'll ever count it. But he had me go up and help his wife cook. She didn't know anything about cooking and making money. And so we lived right in with them. They had 5 children. And I told them on one condition, that was after my little girl had died. I said, if when she gets ready to whip them children, if she'll let me know in time to get off where I can't hear them cry, well, I'll go and help her cook. So we took a job of cooking. And we used to divide what we made extra, you know. At the end of the first month, I knew we was going behind all the time. I could tell that. I'd cooked enough that I could tell. And so I told him, I said, he couldn't hardly believe it. I told him that I'd rather get on the payroll. He said, well, what would you work for? And I said, well, what would you give me? He said, would $30 a month in your board suit you? Why, we hadn't made a dime, you know, we went in the hole. I said, sure. So he paid me $30 a month. My board.
Was that to cook?
And yes, to help his wife cook. So we stayed in that boarding house for a year or so. And we could fry pork chops, dip them in 85-cent dozen eggs, break 3 or 4 eggs, dip them pork chops in, roll them in cracker crumbs before we fry them. I said, Miss Baird, I said, these men are all raised on a farm. They never had anything like that. I said, they'll eat them pork chops just as quick without a thing on them, on just pepper and salt them. And I said, you want to make gravy with every beefsteak and every pork chop you cook, you want to make gravy. Oh, she said her husband didn't like gravy. I said, don't make any difference. I said, they'll eat the butter and preserves for breakfast, and if they had the gravy, they'd make a meal of gravy. She couldn't hardly believe it.
Where were they from?
Pennsylvania Dutch.
What else did you cook there for them?
Oh, everything we could think of, everything there was to groceries, all kinds of groceries. When I was cooking for the railroad man, there was the boss came in one time and he was just been drinking a lot. He sat and ate after the rest was through, and he kept having me pass some macaroni and cheese to him. And after a while we run out, and I said, there isn't any more macaroni. Well, now, he said, the next time you cook macaroni, Lillian, you must allow for them holes. He said, you know, it takes more. The wagon come up with watermelons on it and asked him where were the boys. He went out and he said, what do you want with the boys? He said, well, I want to sell them some of these melons. He said, you don't need the boys. Just unload your melons. I'll buy you melons. So he bought the whole load of melons. And then he was kind of sick of it when he come to himself. And the boys played a trick on him. They wouldn't buy a melon.
Can you describe what during this period, what your day was like, what time you'd get up, what kind of chores you'd do?
When I was cooking for the men?
Yeah.
Well, I slept right in the cook tent.
What time would you get up?
Well, I didn't get up so early after I worked my husband into a deal. See, the men would all come in that cook tent to eat. And I told him if he'd get up and start the fires. It's in the wintertime. How was it? I can't think how it was. Oh, I'd make the fires if he'd help with the dishes at night, and he could sleep in the morning. Well, I'd have my bread, the biscuits all ready to just put the milk in, the buttermilk in, and stir them up, or the water. Sometimes I made water biscuits. And so it didn't take long. Sodium baking powder was already in the flour, you know, and everything was just ready. And meat was all sliced, and the coffee was in the coffee pot and filled with cold water, and all I had to do was set it on the stove where it'd get boiling. So I kind of worked a shenanigan on him. He wouldn't get turned over into sleep till the men would be coming in for breakfast. And I wasn't slow at all. I was fast.
How many men were you cooking for?
Well, most of the time they'd be up in 20, all the way from 20 to 30.
Were you the only one cooking?
Yeah, I was the only one cooking. Nobody else silly enough to.
How'd you do laundry?
On a rub board.
Can you tell me how you did it?
Just hard work.
I mean, you know, how would you heat the water and all that?
Well, I had it in a boiler on the stove. But finally, we got a great big kettle to boil it, the heat outside. Seen this big kettle, we wanted it and we bought it. Oh, it was a great big, huge thing. Render the Lord in it when come time to kill a hog. It'd come in handy.
How do you render lard?
It's been so long ago I hardly remember, but be sure there was no lean on it, on the strips. Then we'd just cut it up in little pieces about so big.
About 2-inch pieces?
About an inch square. And then go through the hide, just maybe have a big piece of the hide and just go down through that, you know, to the hide. And put it on the stove and start it with a little grease, and it'd cook it slow, and you stir it all along. And you cook and render out till there wouldn't be nothing but the crackling left. And take the crackling and make cornbread out of the cracklings.
How long did it take to render the lard?
Well, it's on to how much you had. We generally could render the lard for one good big hog in the day and put it away. cover it and keep it all summer.
Now you say you would grind the sausage?
Grind the sausage.
How much lard could you get out of a big hog?
I don't remember.
And then how did you keep the sausage and all the meat?
We poured lard over it while it was hot. Put it in the jar and pour lard down through over it, and covered over it. That would the lard to get solid, not runny grease. It'll be solid. It'll keep it that way.
And you kept the sausage that way, and what else did you keep with lard?
The tenderloin. Slice it and cook it. You know what that is, don't you? 2 strips right along the back of the backbone. I used to love them cured hams. We burn hickory wood so to make the hickory smoke for smoke the hams. Then we got to buy the smoke and just paste it on the ham, and it'd give them the smell and taste of being a cured ham.
How about the beef? Did you butcher beef?
No, only when the government made them kill the cattle. Then we had beef. Wasn't supposed to, but we managed for it.
The government made you kill the cattle.
I don't know how they killed them, but they canned most of the beef.
How come the government made the people kill the beef?
Well, it's a foolish trick. They thought we had getting too many beef. I don't know. I don't understand it all now, but to make a family that didn't have anything, just had one milk cow, maybe kill that milk cow.
When was this?
It was after I married. I don't remember what year it was.
There was a big depression around 1907, 1908. Do you remember that?
Well, 1908 is when I was married.
Was there a big depression in that year?
I don't know, but there was in the 30s, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was one in the 30s also.
I think in the 30s is when they killed him, had to kill the beef.
Mm-hmm.
I had a sister-in-law that was extra good at canning the beef.
How do you can beef?
I never canned much of it. I helped. There was a good bit of it. But they'd have the pressure cookers to cook it in. And they'd cook it pretty well done before they put it in the pressure cooker. She had 2 big pressure cookers and go far and near canning beef for the families.
So she traveled and canned beef for the different families?
Mm-hmm.
How long did you live in Indiana?
Well, until after I married. Then my husband farmed a farm there close. And I was raised on that. Well, I was 13 and a half when we moved on that claim. She married in 1908, and and I was 23 years old, so I went from 1901 to 1908 wouldn't have been but 7 years, would it?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to figure on it and think it up.
Now, you said that you moved up to Leedy?
Yeah, I went up to Leedy when they was building a railroad up there.
Now, did you move up there, or you just...
No, we left our cattle. We took the horses and put them on the works, Just 3 horses. And took all we had. We didn't take all the furniture either, but we took a stove and table and dishes and things that way.
How come you moved to Leedy?
Supposed to follow that railroad.
You were cooking for the railroad then?
Mm-hmm.
How many men were you
See,
cooking?
my husband's working on the railroad.
Oh, he was? What was he doing?
He was driving his team, I suppose, yes. He was working with the team.
You know what would he haul for him, or did you know?
Well, I guess it'd be the moving the dirt to make the railroad, I suppose.
Were you cooking for the men?
Mm-hmm.
How many men are you cooking for?
You're going to catch me in one for first thing you know. I don't know. Well, there was... See, I cooked for so many men, different times. Oh, when we went to Leedy, we had quite a few because we had to camp out one night. And I told Mr. Hale, I said, I can't cook for him on a campfire. I never did cook on a campfire. He said, oh, I'll have 3 or 4 of the men there helping you. He said, you can cook on a campfire.
Did you?
Mm-hmm. Cooked on the campfire one night and morning.
What'd you cook?
I don't remember. Just bacon and eggs and for breakfast. I suppose, I don't know. Never made any bread.
Mm-hmm. What year was this when you were at Leedy, working with the railroad?
Well, for my little girl was a baby, and she was born in 1910, so it must have been in 1911 and 12.
Did your husband go to World War I?
No. He would have been in the next draft. He had one brother already across, and one brother on a ship to go across when the armistice was signed.
Did you do any work for the war effort?
No. Made bandages.
How'd you make them?
Tore strips of the cloth or cut it, I don't remember.
You want a glass of water?
Tore it and then rolled it up in packages, you know.
Do you need a glass of water?
It helped some, but...
Well, let's just a few more questions. Where were you living during the Depression of the 1930s?
That's when we went to Leedy to work on the railroad. We left our cattle, and we just picked up and went.
What did you cook during that time?
To have shade, we set the stove on the bank of the creek so close to that we couldn't walk behind it. And you could get around the other 3 sides of it. And then come time to wash, see, Pearl was crawling. She wasn't walking yet. And I thought I'd wash out her little white dresses in that water in the creek. I didn't know nothing about jip water, but I found out pretty quick. I put them in that tub to soak and started washing with the soap, and it just curdled up, you know, and oh my. I took them dresses out and rubbed them out a little bit in the hand without any soap and hung them up, and she wore them some more. It looked better without being washed than it did to wash them in that. Then I heard about a schoolhouse It would be about 3 or 4 blocks from if you'd been in town. And I had a sister, and there was no school. And I went up there and set the tub opened the door and set the tub on just inside the door. And I wash in that cold water till run them through 2 waters or soap suds and rinse them, hang them on the fence. And I'd carry the baby back home and then go back and get the clothes. And when I was living in the wagon then, and I'd have to tie her to the wagon wheel to keep it from maybe crawling in that creek. It's a deep bank and the water running in down there. And when I'd get back, she'd cry and right as far as she could go and wipe her face with her little dusty hands, and I'd have a job of cleaning her up.
Is this when you were cooking for the railroad?
That's when I went to cooking for 'em. And when I went to cooking, well, then I used their stuff, you see.
What were the dust storms like during that period?
It just get bank and then be cloudy and filled with dust, and the wind start blowing. And it just blow and you couldn't see. You couldn't see as far as, no, not half as far as me at the wall.
About 10 feet then?
Mm-hmm. I couldn't see nothing.
Well, were you living in a house then?
I think it was the first dust storm I seen. I think I was living in the house.
How'd you keep it out of the house, the dust?
Oh, you couldn't. It just come in the house regardless of how tight you shut it.
How'd you keep it off your body, or did you?
We didn't pay no attention to that. We took a bath every Saturday night whether we needed it or not. In a wash tub.
Were you still working for the railroad then? Was your husband?
No, I don't think so.
What were you doing during that time then, during the dust storms?
I can't remember.
What about World War II? Did you do any work for the war effort in the 40s?
I surely did. I don't know. I don't remember what I done.
Well, we were fighting the Japanese and the Germans.
Had a brother-in-law that fought against the Germans. He had to stay over in France for a few months after the war. He said when he come back, he said never again would he fight the Germans. He said if there ever come up another war, he'd fight with them. He said them French was the dirtiest, most worthless bunch he ever seen. And I'd say, well, now you're talking about my kinfolks, Roy. I said, I'm half French. He said, well, you're not nothing like them. He said, I mean it. He said, I didn't like them at all. But he said the Germans was friendly and working, hard workers, and as thrifty as they could be.
How many kids do you have?
I have one boy living. One died about 7 years ago. He was almost 50 when he died. The other boy lives out at Rattan, Oklahoma, close to Rattan. It's right in the southeast corner, 187 miles from here.
How many grandkids do you have?
5.
Any great-grandkids?
Yeah, let's see, 7.
Well, anything else you want to tell me about your early childhood or Lawton or Indiahoma?
I expect I've told you too much now.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
And now don't put all that down in that history, because that is sound rather foolish, I think.
What's your fondest memory of living around Lawton in Indiana?
Well, I suppose it was I loved to go to school. Whenever I was going to school, I loved that. But my courting days, I suppose, would be about the best.
Can you tell me about your courting days? What'd you do when you went courting?
We were sitting a buggy and ride.
Where would you go?
Well, we'd go to the parade, come a circus to town, and might go to the circus. On Sunday afternoons, we'd go up in the mountains and climb a mountain.
Up in the Wichitas?
Mm-hmm. See, they wasn't much too far north from where we lived.
You have a chaperone?
No, I didn't need a chaperone them days.
Who's the most famous person you've met?
Most which?
Most famous person you've met?
You, I guess.
I don't think so.
I don't know.
No, I think I'm the most infamous.
It wasn't my husband, I know that. You know, he wasn't very smart. I used to tell it on him that he wasn't. He went to school one day in Des Moines, Iowa, and visit the school, and they was having a program after the last recess, and he didn't want to be left out of it. They was all of them going to have to say something, sing a song or reading or something. So he studied all day long. Finally got his little poem memorized. And this is what it was: little grains of water and little grains of sand make the mighty ocean and the mighty land. He was about 8 years old then, or something like that. I used to tell that on him.
Do you know any poetry?
No, nothing that amounts to anything.
Oh, I don't know. Can you recite one for me?
No, I forgot it all.
Now, what's your fondest memory of all?
I don't know. I imagine my school days was just about the happiest time of my life. It was how I loved to go to school.
What'd your school look like?
Hmm?
What'd your school building look like?
What the school children looked like?
The school building.
Oh, it was just a one big room, and had a big tall stove in the middle of it, and keep warm in the winter. We had one teacher that every time he seen anyone whisper, he made them sit down on the floor by their seat with their feet out, straight out in front of them, the knees touching the floor. If he seen one with the knees, now that's hard to do, sit that way very long. Well, he'd go up and hit them a slap with paddle or something, straighten out. So they all thought that was funny, and they all went to whispering, and they all got to sit down on the floor. Company came and knocked on the door, and he said, "Get up, children, get up right quick." Get to the door and open the door. He thought they'd get up, but there was nobody got up. They were all sitting on the floor.
What was his name?
I don't remember, but the board fired him that same week.
Was this in Missouri or in Oklahoma?
In Oklahoma.
What was your favorite lesson?
Well, I loved reading and spelling and arithmetic. I liked them better than any of it.
How many grades were in that one room?
8.
How far did you go in school?
I went 2 weeks in the 8th grade in Lawton.
What school did you go to? What was the name of it?
I don't know, don't remember. I went back in Missouri visiting after my husband died. I went to this schoolhouse, and my cousin that was with me showing me around, she said, "Does it look familiar?" And I said, "Well, the door, it's not the same building unless they've turned it around." She said, "No, that's the same building." And I said, "No, it isn't." I said, "We used to walk from our place, we'd walk right up into the yard." And I said, "No," I said, "our house is gone. There's all pasture there then." But she'd showed me the road that we came, and I'd seen a house or two on that road, I remembered. But anyway, I said, "No," I said, "that door's in the other side." So when she took me over to another cousin's to stay a few days, and she said, "Did anything look familiar to you back around where you was raised?" And I said, "Well, the schoolhouse looked the same, but it was turned around." I said, "It wasn't sitting like it used to." She said, "Well, that ain't the same building that you went to school in." I said, "Well, I tried to tell Hilda it wasn't, but she said it was." And she said, "No," she said, "that schoolhouse you went to school in burned down just right after you folks left." And she said they built this new one in the place of it, but they entered it from the side instead of the end. Hilda says, "Well, why didn't I know that?" She said, "You was too young to pay any attention to realize."
Okay, I think we have a very good interview. Thank you.
I think there's a lot of silliness in there now. If you do me just right, I don't think you better put that of it in.
Okay.